Welcome back to Becoming Her, a podcast from the Prayer She Whispered. I'm Nikki Brown, founder and executive strategist here at TWSP, and this series explore what it means to grow professionally, personally, and collectively with honesty, faith, and compassion. Now, before we begin today, I want to share a gentle note of care. This episode includes reflection on my own childhood sexual abuse. And while I do not share details, I do invite you to be mindful and take care of yourself while listening. Pause if you need to, and come back if and when you are ready. Today's episode is not about what happened to me, but it's about who I chose to become after and what coping really looks like when healing unfolds over a lifetime. If you know me, you know that I am a big advocate in long term and tertiary preventative care. And I believe truly that it's a big gap in our current system. So I'll talk a little bit more about that uh, here shortly. So, first, I'm going to talk about who I became to survive. And this really starts when I am 7 years old and I was sexually abused and molested by a trusted family member. And like I said, I'm not going into too many details, but what I do want to highlight about that whole experience, and what I think is really the most important thing that people can do for children who have been abused and who have survived any kind of trauma, but especially sexual trauma, is believing them, right? And my people, the people who were closest to me, they did that. And they did everything right after I disclosed. We went to the Child Advocacy Center. My abuse was confirmed, and so was the abuse of a younger sibling. And I began therapy, right? I was supported, I was believed, I was protected not only by my mom, but by my village. And not long after, I graduated therapy. I had coping mechanisms. I wrote poetry and journaled, and I processed a lot with words and through words and intellect. My therapist at the time praised my ability to find positive ways to cope, and in many ways, she was right. It was true. But survival and healing are not the same thing. Looking back now with the wisdom of time and my big age, I can say this gently and honestly that I coped exceptionally well for my age at the time, but I also healed incompletely, not because anybody failed me, but because coping is often mistaken for completion. Even this year, I had a therapist tell me in workplace counseling that my intelligence sometimes made it difficult for him to give me the proper tools that I needed to use in the workplace. And while he wasn't completely wrong, um, it stuck with me because I'm like, I'm coming for you for help, and you telling me I'm too smart to actually help because that ain't. Anyways, my intelligence has always been a protective factor for me. It's helped me to survive and excel into a career of helping people compassionately um, because I'm leading with myself. But it has also helped me to stay composed when I might have needed to be soft, and vice versa, be lenient on boundaries that I needed to be firm in. And that's not necessarily beneficial for me now. This Even writing this episode stirred emotions for me. Even now, 25 years later. And it doesn't mean that I'm broken, but it does mean that healing is alive. Um, and it's something that we carry with us throughout our whole lifetime. It's never ending. Who am I now? I want to pause and just let y'all know, not as a critique, but as context, right? I am kind of type A. I like order. I like clarity. I like to plan. Um, and when things feel uncertain, I can be a little bit controlling or a lot of bit controlling, depending on who you're asking. But I'm also deeply creative at heart. Writing has always been a place of safety for me and a place where I make meaning when the world didn't necessarily feel predictable. And my love language is words of affirmation because language, naming things, understanding things, putting words to experiences is and was how I learned to survive and feel seen. None of these traits are flaws, they're adaptations. They are the shape that my coping took as I grew into adulthood. And this is why it matters to say this out loud. Coping doesn't just help us survive an event, it often shapes us and it shapes who we become. So here's the truth I want to offer you today: coping is not failure, coping is wisdom, and coping is the nervous system doing what it must to survive. Trauma changes the way the brain and body responds to stress. This is an opinion, this is science. When something overwhelming happens, especially in childhood, the nervous system learns one thing first: how do I stay alive? Not how do I thrive, not how do I heal, but how do I get through the moment? So, coping strategies happen fast and they develop intelligently. For some people, coping is achievement, staying busy, excelling at whatever it is, and becoming dependable. For others, it looks like emotional control. You stay composed, you don't ask for help, you become the strong one. Then for others, it's creativity, writing, music, art, anything imaginative like Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder. And then for others, coping looks like numbing. That might include substance use or misuse, not because someone is weak, but because their body is trying to regulate pain, stress, and memory with the tools that they have access to. Trauma research tells us that coping behaviors are adaptations to threats. They are not moral failures, they are survival responses. So we often will praise coping strategies that um, are socially rewarded, like intelligence or productivity or composure. And that gives us room to shame others, even though they often come from the same need, and that is to make it through the day. This episode is not about coping the right way, it's about coping to survive. And survival deserves compassion, not judgment, because it can look a lot of different ways. Coping helps you get through, And healing asks a different question, which is, what do I need now? And that question and the answer to that question will change over time. Research on ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences, for those who aren't familiar, show us that trauma doesn't just live in memory, but it lives in the body, physically and genetically. It can show up years later after an event as chronic stress, as difficulty with emotional regulation, weight changes, health challenges, relationship patterns, burnout, anxiety that just comes out of nowhere. So, when coping strategies resurface or when new needs emerge decades later, it's not regression. That's the body asking for a new way to care, a new way of care. And this is where I want us to slow down. If you are listening and realizing that some coping tools no longer serve you, or that some strategies that helped you survive now feel heavy, that doesn't mean you failed. It means that those tools did their jobs, and now God wants you to get some new tools for your toolkit. Survival was the first healing. A gentler healing comes later, and both deserve compassion. One of the hardest parts of healing is realizing that coping strategies that once protected you can later limit you. And that doesn't mean that you did anything wrong. It means that healing is layered. It means that growth is iterative. And the question isn't, why did I cope this way? The question is, what do I need now that I didn't have then? Now, I want to speak directly to the organizations and the leaders who are serving survivors, and this includes myself. Many of our systems are designed around time limited services, eligibility requirements, disclosure thresholds, police reports, blah, 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 blah. The list goes on and on. These structures are often coming from funding constraints, not from how healing actually works. So when systems prescribe care, people are left out. Survivors who don't report, survivors who don't disclose until decades later, survivors whose trauma show up somatically, so in their weight gain or loss, chronic stress, health challenges. And then also survivors whose coping doesn't look clean or compliant. We know from the ACEs research that trauma lives in the body. So if 25 years after abuse, somebody needs support related to health, well-being, or long-term regulation, that's not regression. That's just a trauma-informed reality. And when systems require survivors to present as stable or compliant in order to access care, we exclude the people that trauma-informed systems are meant to serve. Substance use and other types of negative coping mechanisms should be a signal for more care, not less access. If we want our care to be truly comprehensive and inclusive, we must be willing to imagine services beyond the red tape and timelines. Healing does not inspire because grant cycles end. Long term tertiary care must be a part of the conversation because systems fail, but survivors live full lives far beyond the crisis or the event. So, y'all, as we come to an end, I ask you to move through the rest of your week with these questions in mind. Um, who did you become to survive? What parts of you worked overtime to keep you safe? And what might gentler healing look like now? If this episode resonated with you, share it with someone who might need permission to return to their healing without shame. Now I will leave you with this blessing. May you honor the version of yourself who survived with wisdom. May you meet the parts of you that still carry memory with compassion and not judgment. May you remember, healing is not about doing it right. It's about staying present for as long as it takes. Until next time, grow gently.